In the common conception of the Middle Ages, we have a great number of stories and legends that border between myths and historical events. Fiction and facts get intermixed in later recountings, creating contradicting sources that can be hard to distinguish from reality, and introducing a multitude of misconceptions about our knowledge of the time. One such story is the Children's Crusade, a pilgrimage of young devotees that ended in tragedy, and that has inspired numerous works by authors ranging from Voltaire to Agatha Christie. In this video, we will explore what the sources tell us about this event, its background, and the effects it had on the following Crusades. If you want to learn more about the Crusades, you've got to check out the sponsor of this video, Magellan TV, our most loyal partner and an excellent documentary platform. Magellan TV is a documentary streaming service run by filmmakers that has over 3,000 documentaries, among them hundreds of historical documentaries. We're excited to announce that Magellan is now offering gift cards, allowing you to get yourself or the people you love the gift of knowledge. Now is the time to try it and share this excellent service with your friends and family. Magellan TV has a phenomenal selection of historical documentaries on various topics, and if you're interested in the Crusades, you've got to check out Byzantium, Crusaders and Venice, which focuses on the Fourth Crusade, and the dramatization of the Third Crusade titled Richard the Lionheart, following the exploits of the English king. You can watch both anytime, anywhere, on your television, laptop or mobile device, and it's compatible with most devices. The best part is Magellan TV is offering a 1-month free membership trial to our viewers. If you haven't signed up to Magellan yet, support our channel and do that at try.magellantv.com/kingsandgenerals. You'll get a free 1-month membership trial. The popular recounting of the Children's Crusade is as such. In the spring of the year 1212, a young shepherd named Stephen is watching his flock in the French countryside. Alone during the night, he is approached by a man who begs him for food and shelter. After he feeds the wanderer, the man reveals himself to be Jesus Christ and asks the boy to give a letter to the French king. The boy travels to Saint-Denis, preaching on his way, and gathers a large crowd of young boys and girls. Once at Saint-Denis, he delivers the letter to the king and implores him to take the cross. Children from France and Germany flock to the prophet, who declares that they would march to the Holy Land without wetting their feet and topple the local Muslim kingdoms by converting the population to Christianity. The following, numbering in the tens of thousands, heeds the call for a crusade and travels south towards the Mediterranean Sea, until they reach the port of Marseille. Here the prophecy that the sea would split at their presence does not occur, so many return home while others wait. At this point, the pilgrims are approached by two merchants, Hugo Ferrus and Guilhelmus Porus, who promise them safe passage to Palestine. Once aboard their vessels, however, the travel ends in tragedy, as the transports are either shipwrecked along the coast of Sardinia, or the children are sold into slavery in Tunis, depending on the recounting. So why did this tragedy happen? At the start of the 13th century, Europe was at the tail end of the High Middle Ages. In the previous 2 centuries, Western Europe had experienced a slow and steady economic growth and an increase in population. The causes for these economic advancements have been attributed to the warmer climate, a decrease in raids caused by invaders, and most importantly, the introduction or rediscovery of technologies, especially in metallurgy, that resulted in the manufacturing of iron-tipped plows and other machinery, the implementation of new agricultural techniques, and the construction of water mills. The increased yields had the effect of incrementing the population and changing the management of the terrain. These changes brought with them another development, the growth of European cities. It is at this time that the great northern European cities such as Paris, Mainz and Cologne start to become more and more relevant. The booming population, The new technologies and the judicial liberties that the cities offered induced an expansion of trade and production in these centers, introducing and spreading technologies and new ideas. Money returned as the main means of exchange, and a new class of merchants and artisans emerged that would become crucial for the further development of the European towns. However, as cities grew and some layers of society got richer, a great number of people were left behind in extreme poverty. While in rural areas, institutions such as the church or local nobility had alleviated this, the great concentration of poor people in the cities made wealth inequality even more arduous. One series of events that took place at this time were the Crusades. Their origins and causes are to this day a hotly debated topic that split historians and scholars, but some of the reasons that are most often mentioned are the desire for plunder and new lands, along with the genuine will to free the Holy Lands from Muslim presence, the desire for adventure, and the indulgence for one's sins. The First Crusade ended with the conquest of Jerusalem and Palestine in 1099, and was followed by a century of warfare, battles, and crusades in the Levant. By the end of the 12th century, the Crusader states had lost Jerusalem, and were mostly concentrated on the coast. In 1204, the Fourth Crusade took place, which resulted in the sack of Constantinople and the temporary destruction of the Eastern Roman Empire, perpetrated by the Venetians and Crusaders, putting a dampener on enthusiasm to crusade in the Levant. So, in the year 1212, we find Western Europe more concentrated on interregional conflict than outward expansion. The Holy Roman Empire was split between the Welf and Hohenstaufen families vying for the imperial throne. The Iberian kingdoms were focused on their own struggle, while the French were on their path to end the Angevin Empire. Pope Innocent III was an enthusiastic supporter of the Crusades, but at that time he was concentrated on reforming the church rules and weeding out internal heresies. One such heresy was Catharism, a Christian movement that had a great following in southern France, and that sparked the Albigensian Crusade that took place at that time. It is in this year, in the spring and summer of 1212, that the so-called Children's Crusade takes place. It is certain that a great number of pilgrims moved in Europe that year, as a number of sources cite their presence. Unfortunately, these citations are often short and do not give much information about the events that took place on their journey. The lack of coherent documentation can be explained by the popular nature of the expedition, as the actions of the lower classes did not attract much interest from the chroniclers of that time. One thing that is certain is that the journeying of people was not made in a single group, but there were two distinctive movements taking place at the same time, one in France and the other in Germany. No source can confirm if they influenced each other, but it is possible that there was a connection, as they both started in similar ways. We know that in the winter and the spring of 1211 and 1212, in northeastern France, the lowlands, and western Germany, a great number of preachers feverishly exhorted to crusade against the heresies in Europe, the most prominent of which were, as mentioned, the Cathars in Languedoc, so the base for the religious fervour had been priorly laid. The French movement started in the summer, and was headed by a young boy called Stephen of Cloyes. Similar to the popular recounting, it is said that he was visited by Jesus and that he had a message for the French king. He started to preach and was joined by more people until the procession of 30,000 souls reached the Abbacy of Saint-Denis, the royal residence at the time. Here Stephen gave the message to a representative of the king, Philip Augustus, and recounted his vision. The king, advised by the University of Paris, told the group to return home so that no harm would come upon them in faraway lands. Here the sources end their recounting, but it seems that most of them did return home, or joined the Albigensian Crusade, while Stephen returned to his herd and disappears from history. It is, however, believed among historians that this was not a branch of the actual Children's Crusade, but instead part of an annual procession of peasants that had an unusually young and pious speaker, who never himself intended to go to Palestine, and that later was connected to the Children's Crusade. The other movement took place in Germany, where it was initiated in Cologne. Here a child named Nicholas is said to have had a vision of a flaming cross in the skies, and started to preach that they should travel to the Holy Land, and that they would convert the local population without bloodshed. Not much is known about Nicholas, though it is mentioned that his father, a wicked man, helped him in organizing the procession. The call to arms to liberate the Holy Land spread to the neighboring regions, and a group of 20,000 people departed south through the Rhine Valley. Many died traversing the Alps, either of hunger, freezing, or killed by bandits or beasts, while others abandoned the procession and returned home, either at Mainz or Piacenza. The crusade of now 7,000 people reached the gates of Genoa. Here Nicholas had prophesied that the sea would part in two so the pilgrims could reach the Levant, but as this did not happen, they splintered into groups. Some returned home, others stayed in Genoa, invited to remain as cheap labour was sought after by the growing mercantile republic. Another group took to Marseille, whose end is unknown and has been the main hook for legends, such as that they found passage but were shipwrecked or sold into slavery. The last group, including Nicholas, travelled to Rome. Here they met Pope Innocent III, and were absolved of their oath to take the cross in autumn and could return home, though the vast majority did not. A question that has been often raised is, who were the participants in this crusade, and were they actually children? Historians have looked at the use of the Latin word pueri, which is most often translated as children, but can also mean the powerless, as in the least privileged members of society. On the other side, another factor that has to be taken into consideration is that young people and children made up roughly the majority of the European population, and had in the Middle Ages a lot more duties and reached maturity earlier than today. Some historians, like Peter Ratz, believed that it was not a crusade of children, but instead of the most marginalized members of society at that time. But more recent analyses of the sources seem to confirm that at least a big minority of them were children and young boys and girls who were joined by women, elders, poor people, criminals, and other members of the lowest strata. What surprised the writers of the time was the great number of young people in the crusade, unusual for that kind of voyage. We know that some youngsters of richer families also joined the crusade, getting quite certainly robbed or killed on their way, and a source mentions that Nicholas's father was executed in Cologne when so many of the citizens' children did not return, so it is certain that a number of young people did travel. To understand how the movement started, we have to look at the previously mentioned religious fervour that was simmering around the Seine and Rhine valleys after the preaching for a crusade against heresies, and the great number of desperate people in extreme poverty that lived in the cities where the pilgrims started. An important factor that can help us understand the motivation of the masses is their faith. The Vatican librarian Leonard E. Boyle distinguishes in the Middle Ages the faith of the learned theologians of the universities and that of the common folk. The latter of these was characterized by the belief that faith was a gift of God to those who gave themselves to Him wholeheartedly, so physical action or contact, such as pilgrimage and relics, was very important for them. Death was of lesser importance if done under the name of God. In fact, it was not the first time the marginalized members of society went on crusade-like ventures, such as the Poor's Crusade of 1095 led by Peter the Hermit, which preceded the First Crusade and ended in disaster in Anatolia. Was the Children's Crusade actually a crusade? Both contemporaries and modern scholars agree that it was not. Despite the convictions of those who participated, the movement had no legal basis as a crusade. The Pope or any other papal authority had not sanctioned it, the Church did not bless the movement, and it was not encouraged by indulgences, and the chroniclers of the time do not talk about the crusade in a positive light. Still though, many of the young Germans did take the cross, the promise to join the effort to free the Holy Land, and it is said that Pope Innocent was impressed by these young members. According to the chronicler Albertia Batistadensis, the Pope remarked, "These children put us to shame. They rush to recover the Holy Land while we sleep." Later chroniclers took the misfortunes of these bands of poor people and embellished them with details, creating a story of paragons of virtue and Christian zeal, elements of which have been picked up by later literary works that took inspiration from this story, like many children's stories. Although the so-called Children's Crusade was a complete fiasco, it still had an impact on the crusades that followed. Whether Pope Innocent was actually moved by the attempt is uncertain, as he is known to have been fond of crusades, but the following year he did call for a new crusade to retake the Holy Land in a papal bull, and 4 years later the Fifth Crusade was launched in 1217. We have more videos on the history of the Middle Ages on the way, so make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button. Please consider liking, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Our videos would be impossible without our kind patrons and YouTube channel members, whose ranks you can join via the links in the description to know our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our Discord and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.